Hello any and all, and welcome to this year's Spookathon. I'm going to be uploading a video for every week of the entire month, or at least I'm going to try, each covering a very spooky topic, starting with the most lax one out of the bunch. Today, we're diving into some special relics created by yours truly. Many of you have probably heard the term creepypasta, but it's likely you haven't exactly been given a faithful description, or at least one from somebody who was truly invested in them as a child, even if they really shouldn't have. Yes, most creepypastas are bad. Many have said it, and I won't deny that. But the truth is, that's only a result of the fact that literally anybody could make them. No age or language barrier could stop you from posting your own, especially given that the most commonly used website for these stories, the Creepypasta Wiki, is entirely community run, with any registered user being able to upload their own spooky spaghetti. To this end, I think what many don't understand is that for the most part, this open source storytelling, so to speak, is incredibly endearing. Most of the time, when you can tell a creepypasta was written by someone younger, then you can also tell they were just having fun with it. Yes, many of them are nearly identical, and some of them are very concerning if written by a child, but sometimes you'll find one that is so disjointed and so confusing that it kind of becomes adorable and fantastic in its own right. This leads me to the topic of today's video. In the past, I've written my own creepypastas, twice to be specific, and I wanted to go over them. So get ready for some jank, some questionable writing choices, and maybe, just maybe, a genuine scare or two.
Story 1, Godzilla vs. Deutalios.
Hello, my name is Terry Kaiser. I live in a small one-story house, and I freaking love Godzilla, and my last name just fuels my love for it.
Not even a complete sentence in, and there's already a grammatical error with some rather silly writing. Why do we need to know your full name? Why do we need to know that you live in a one-story house? And why do we need to know that you freaking love Godzilla, as you put it? The world may never know. Also, fuels it how exactly? I kid, of course. The intention was that the protagonist's surname happened to line up with the character Kaiser Ghidorah from one of the movies, but to anyone reading who isn't familiar with literally any of that, this comment is just confusing and is never explained.
But I've always had a nagging interest for the scrapped movies such as GVAB, Godzilla, Varan and Gears and Baragon, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, a mouthful I know, or Godzilla vs. Red Moon.
Was commenting on the absurdity of this title really necessary for your lost episode creepypasta past me? Really, younger me should have realized that this comment, along with everything else prior, sets the completely wrong tone for a scary story, and she instead should have opted for listing titles that are less comically verbose. That would have only helped this mess of a starting paragraph.
But anyways, I digress. Most people say the series is rather cheesy, though I have to say it is anything but cheesy. So my best friend was moving out. His name Greg Kennedy. He was a good friend of mine. I think he had disorder. I never asked though, out of fear of looking like a rude jerk. That's just the way I think, but the reason I say this is because sometimes had random spasms and twitches, but something disturbing but something disturbing about him was that he would sometimes talk about something very, well, sadistic, but then seconds later completely dismiss it. But overall, a good friend. Anyway, my birthday came and sadly, it was also he moved. Oh my god, I can fucking breathe.
Oh my goodness! Completely ignoring the fact that there's once again the unnecessary disclosure of full names, there are simply far too many commas here. I can't tell whether or not this is worse than having a run-on sentence. In this case, it just feels like the protagonist is rambling on and on, rather than speaking concisely and with intent. This is a mess, and you could even hear me at the end faking the fact that I could finally breathe, even though I messed up halfway through all of that. And the fact that I needed to take a breath, even while having restarted with a new breath in my throat, halfway through the sentence speaks volumes.
Yet he came to my house. I asked him what he was doing there, and he simply gave me a VHS labeled Godzilla vs. Deutalios and said, "Thought you might like, knew how much you liked Godzilla," and left after saying happy birthday.
Writers, take this bit of advice with a grain of salt. While this dialogue is technically grammatically incorrect, if the rest of your writing is strong and if it's a consistent through line with that character, sloppy grammar in dialogue can be excused to a certain extent. However, as we'll see, we don't get much else from this character, so I'm gonna have to assume that this was an error on my younger self's part.
What happened next was sad.
Oh no! Jesus, that kind of sounded like I was auto-tuned or some shit, what the? When the author tells you something is sad, that's how you know it's sad. Writers, take note, even in the context of narration, this clip from Futurama still applies.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
You, as the author, cannot just tell the audience what to feel by going,
"This is scary,"
or
"This is sad."
you need to make the audience actually feel the emotion you want them to feel through your writing, rather than just telling them how to feel.
The following day, Greg's family got caught in a car crash with an old man. The old man was the only survivor.
I'm going to ignore the slightly off grammar just this once to focus on the bigger issue of the sense in particular. This is way too sudden of a tone shift. The story has had a fairly chipper attitude, and that has been brought to a screeching halt with this single sentence. Take note, writers, if you want to have a specific tone, you need to be consistent. It's best to start out with that tone and just go from there. But if you really want it to change, then at least build up to that change. This is such an out of nowhere tonal shift that I'm surprised my neck didn't snap from whiplash.
I fell under a depression. My best friend was dead to some drunk A-man.
Oh boy, that's how you know my younger self wrote this. She's perfectly content with including the topics of drunk driving and child death, but saying the word ass is too far. I wish I was joking. My younger self was very much concerned with being a goody two-shoes and hated swear words, to the point that when anyone else said them, she'd quietly whisper to herself,
"Sorry, Dad."
Again, I wish I was joking.
And my only reminder of Greg was this, a VHS of a Godzilla film I've never heard of. I knew I'd never get out of this depression just sitting down, so I got my old VHS player and inserted the movie. It started out normal, but the title had the same logo as Godzilla vs. Biollante. I thought this was strange, but I proceeded on. But a small feeling in gut made me flinch. It was me trying to get excited, but I remained depressed. Anyway, the reason that feeling was made was because the monster fight was about to begin. And Godzilla was the same. It was the Heisei suit. Which one? I don't know. But Deutalios was a giant rat-fish amalgamation. So that was interesting.
Just what the doctor ordered. Another pseudo run-on sentence. Oh boy. Not only are there many great places to stop and let the reader breathe a bit, but this sentence isn't very good even outside of grammar. Once again, prior knowledge to the Godzilla series and its deeper trenches of trivia is required to even understand any of this. Why is the logo for Godzilla vs. Biollante being there so strange? Well, yeah, I said Deutalios earlier, but the average reader has no idea who either of those characters are. Let alone the fact that Deutalios was a canned monster from an earlier draft of Biollante's movie. Also, I just love the sentence, "but I remain depressed." Not to self-deprecate, but if younger me and I have one thing in common, it's that. There's also the fact that the reason that feeling was made was because the monster fight is about to begin. Really didn't need to be separated by a comma. That and a little rephrasing would have made that bit fine. Another part of the sentence that I love for all the wrong reasons was, Godzilla was the same, it was the Heisei suit, which one I don't know. Because again, prior knowledge is kind of required to understand that one. Not a lot of people know the different Japanese eras. However, I especially love the bit that says, which one I don't know. So this kid is such a massive Godzilla fan that they know about scrappy movies, except for the Biollante draft I mentioned earlier, but whatever. But not the different suits? That's not that crazy. That tidbit is entirely there because I myself at that time couldn't be bothered to memorize the suits of that era. Still can't, to be completely honest, but that's whatever.
But what I saw next was disturbing.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel? That makes me feel...
Godzilla had used atomic breath to cut off part of Deutalios' tail, but one of the things that shocked me the most, there was actually blood. Deutalios did a scream of pain.
Did a scream of pain is absolutely hilarious. Not let out a scream, but did a scream. What, is that the name of a skateboard trick or something? I guess Deutalios is kinda sick with it.
Not just a modified animal roar or chirp, but a literal scream.
This is scarily ahead of the curve in terms of my taste in sound design. This was years before I watched Evangelion or played Doom, both of which having used sound effects of human voices for monsters. Granted, in the context of a Lost Episode Creepypasta, it's not exactly groundbreaking, and if anything, only serves to make the reader roll their eyes.
Godzilla proceeded to kick Deutalios repeatedly, and Godzilla did his iconic roar, but edited to where he's literally laughing, as if he's enjoying causing pain on this poor, innocent creature.
Damn, what the fuck is his problem? This fish rat just showed up out of nowhere and Godzilla decided he's gonna be a bastard? Oh my god. Is Godzilla conservative? I guess it makes more sense than Manga Garrus. Also, yet again, did his iconic roar is pretty funny. More so here, given that nowadays I associate the term blank's iconic blank with a Smiling Friends and or Oni Plays bit more than anything.
Godzilla finished kicking and, oh my god, were my exact words. There was a gash where Godzilla kicked Deutalios. Godzilla proceeded lunge over.
And here we get to the obligatory less spooky imagery of a Lost Episode Creepypasta. And hey, it's accompanied by a dip in grammar quality too. This story truly is a gift that keeps giving.
Godzilla proceeded lunge over and started to eat. Deutalios started whimpering. Deutalios, oh my god, he was still alive. Godzilla was eating him alive. I saw tears go down Deutalios' face or snout. I couldn't even believe what was happening.
And my younger self forgot to put a period there. You rascal. Anyway, here we have unnecessarily cruel depictions of violence. Thankfully it's nothing too graphic, but if it was, the issue would be the same, just a lot worse. There's no build up to this. I've recently rewatched the original Alien for another video, and because I just wanted to rewatch a classic from my childhood. Kane getting attached to the facehugger is a pretty big moment in the film. It's the point of the movie in which the crew's actions enter 2D, so to speak. Now that the parasite has clung to him, they can only bring him with parasite intact, or leave him to die. And when the facehugger has detached itself and the alien larva bursts from his chest, it's a visceral scene. However, prior to all of that, the film has been incredibly quiet, music included. The soft, mellowed music and ambient computer noises have populated the air prior, and the Nostromo crew exploring the derelict keeps us on our toes. That is build-up. The chestburster scene doesn't come out of left field, while this does. This part of the story has no build-up. There's been nothing to actually keep us on our toes. Nothing to build up tension. You need tension for horror to work. Let's continue.
I couldn't even believe what was happening, so I pinched myself to see if I was having some fricked up nightmare.
Oh boy, this again. No swearing on this Christian server. Drug driving and brutal violence is okay though. Maybe this story really is conservative.
No, I wasn't dreaming. This was real. When Godzilla finished with his meal, he walked.
He walked? Where? Across the road? To the bar? To get milk and never come back? Truly the question of our era. Will we ever find out? Will science ever solve this mystery? Or perhaps it's best if we never find out. Stay tuned, or something. I don't know. Let's just get this over with. This story's almost finished.
Deutalios kept weeping. Oh dear God. Deutalios, he was going through all this pain, and he was still alive. I heard a familiar screech. It was Biolante. She came to Deutalios. and just held him in place. Obviously with some sympathy for the creature, Violante then charged towards Godzilla, the film faded to black, and simply ended. Oof.
Count on younger me to have made a creepypasta about one of the best movies in the franchise and have missed the point of it because she never saw it. Also, that's it?
That's it? That's the last episode? That was just—
Godzilla eating a sushi rat.
What a rip!
There's an entire half of the movie just missing? Oh boy, talk about anticlimactic. Just like this story. Speaking of...
This was messed up. Would Toho actually make this? I went on Google and looked up Godzilla vs. Deutalios. Surprisingly, I actually found a link on Wikizilla.
Whoa, a Wikizilla mention in my Lost Episode creepypasta? Well, yeah, I did write this after all. Shout out to Wikizilla, by the way.
It was an official film, but it was the original draft for Godzilla vs. Violante scrapped. ...
Ouch. Ending on a typo and one of the worst bits of grammar in this story. Truly a terrible fate for this tale. So, this was a very short story that, again, I made when I was around 12 or 13. I made this story partly to try and prove that I could make something better than the big stories similar to it at the time, like Squidward Suicide, Suicide Mouse, and Dead Bart, or even Sonic.exe. As you can probably tell, it really wasn't that great, and I personally can't even bring myself to say it was better than those stories, apart from Sonic.exe, but to be fair, the bar for that is steeped in the Mariana Trench. It doesn't necessarily take a lot to surpass a story that was so bad it got moved to a joke story wiki, only for the author to throw a hissy fit about it, and then a few years later be outed as a pedophile. This should serve as a warning to all creatives. If you're making something purely out of spite, you're bound to fail. I mean, hell, just look at Spider-Man Lotus. That was an unmitigated disaster made from spite and ego. But also keep in mind that is different from making your own version of something that already exists and that you see as an improvement. It's tricky, but there is a balance that you need to find in that regard. I myself have other projects in store that act as a self-made version of other things that I feel work better. In those cases, I can say it's different because I'm trying to improve an already bad thing because I see potential in it, or just because it ignited my creative drive. This story is closer to Spider-Man Lotus in this sense. Hi there, post-editing Melody here. I actually only thought of this after exporting the video for a second time to work around some copyright issues and to extrapolate on some things that I get into later on in the video. But something I realized that I should really give my past self credit for is the fact that this story exists at all. Quality withstanding, of course, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that this story is actually quite emblematic of how I write things. Remember, I wrote this because little me heard about an earlier draft of Godzilla vs. Violante that was merely speculated to have been canned for being too graphic. I still do amateur writing with the Godzilla series and its creatures to this day, more so around a more like sci-fi thriller kind of vibe rather than the Monster Fest I used to do around the same age that I actually wrote this. But a lot of that writing, again, also around the same time that I wrote this, is just reimagining ideas that never got made into actual movies and turning them into something myself. In fact, a lot of my writing is that, taking things into my own hands to do an idea or a character justice that I think it deserves. A younger me saw potential in something a studio tossed aside, and I still operate on that mindset. In fact, very soon, I will actually be working on a full video of this very idea with a very specific Sonic game that I have an absolute distaste for. I mean, hell, just this year, I read the 2022 miniseries from DC Comics, Arkham City Order of the World by Dan Waters and illustrated by... Okay, let's see if I can get this right the first try. Denai Kaleidini. And the two of them had managed to reinvent a character that everybody had completely disregarded for the longest time because he was too goofy, that being the Ten-Eyed Man. And rather than just making him a serial killer, like with how The Long Halloween handled Calendar Man similarly, by just turning him into a, like, mime-looking Tim Burton serial killer, they turned the Ten-Eyed Man into an unpredictable force whose nature is constantly second-guessed. Does he actually have supernatural powers? Can he actually see through his fingertips? Or is he just delusional? My younger self didn't deliver on this potential, but the fact that she even tried makes me proud in retrospect. Yet another past version of myself deleted this story off of my DeviantArt a few years back out of embarrassment. But shame on her. This story is trash, but the effort alone is worth it, and it provides a very fun read for all the wrong reasons. However, it did serve as a learning experience, even if I didn't learn everything I should have from it. Speaking of, next story.
Story 2. The Exodus of Krahendorf Felsen.
Here's a bit of context for this story as well. This one was also kind of made out of spite, like the last one, but a bit less so in this case. More than anything, it was a way for me to try and register the lessons I had learned from hearing and reading other actually bad creepypastas, and try to apply what I had learned to my own writing, so that I could, I guess, prove to myself that I had actually learned something. The main way I learned these lessons was from a YouTube channel called Michael Loire, which is more often referred to as Bad Creepypasta because of the show that would be posted on there called, well, Bad Creepypasta, hosted by Jacob Sherwood, not Michael Loire, because that's a pseudonym, apparently. Regardless, it would just be him and a bunch of his other friends just trashing on a bunch of really bad stories. And although I had learned a lot of very valuable lessons regarding writing from those videos, in retrospect, a lot of them were overly mean-spirited and really just seemed to be aggressive simply for the sake of being aggressive. That being said, I initially stopped watching them because, truth be told, even to this day, I just kind of have this ongoing revolving door of creators that I watch from time to time. However, the reason why I haven't watched anything from them ever since then is because at some point there was some drama between themselves and one of their editors, my good friend Shadow White, that had started to come out about his ex who had abused him. And for some odd reason, the crew of Bad Creepypasta decided to victim blame him rather than give him any sort of affirmation and comfort. And looking at a few of the people that he collaborated with, this seems to have burned a lot of bridges for Jacob. And of course, reflecting both that and my attitude around the time, if you go to the Creepypasta wiki and find some of my older comments on certain stories from that era, you'll find them a lot more, how do I put this, childishly aggressive. That, and you'll also find me appropriating a lot of British slang because, well, Jacob Sherwood and his friends were British, and I just thought it sounded funny. Granted, I still do think it sounds funny, but I don't go around using it anymore because, frankly, it kind of just comes across as try-hardish in my opinion. However, the last portion of why I wanted to write this story was because I wanted to actually accomplish something with horror. As you'll come to see, it has more of a gothic feeling crossed with a more rustic horror kind of setting. And this is something that I haven't really seen very often in creepypastas, and something that I wish I could see more. Granted, I am a bit biased given that gothic horror is one of my favorite forms of horror, but that's besides the point. Anyways, let us continue as we read The Exodus of Krahendorf Felsen. Oh, and this time around I'll actually just be trying to read it with my normal voice because that last one really hurt my throat, and also this one has some things going for it rather than being a complete pile of shit. Krahendorf Felsen, shortened as Krahendorf, was an old German village not known by many, as it was surrounded by forests and constantly shrouded in fog. However, not many people remember it. Some people even miraculously forgot it ever existed. However, the very few who do remember its existence have been quite perplexed as to what happened to it. There was always something off about the town according to some. Although scholars deny it, some people think something paranormal was behind the town's eclipse from the physical realm. Now this is a good start. I do think it's a bit redundant to clarify that the town is shorthanded as just Krahendorf, as it's easy to assume regardless. Besides that, this, again, is a really good start. It sets up a nice bit of intrigue and mystery, as well as, at least so far, establishes a very good tone for a horror story. At least, far better than the last story. Let's continue. Charlotte Newman, Gertrude Muller, and Amelia Zimmerman. These were the names of 3 adolescent girls who were tried and executed for witchcraft on June 1st, 1823. While the other 2 pleaded they were innocent, Charlotte told them they would regret it and insisted the trio was doing the village a favor. They were hanged for their crimes, and that night their bodies were burned. I'm noticing a few grammatical errors here and there, but there's nothing too egregious yet. Though when it says Charlotte told them, quote, they would regret it, end quote, it is a bit confusing, and it sounds like she was saying that to the other women. That is, up until she argues that they were helping the town. While not incorrect grammar, it does have very bad flow, and my younger self should have tidied this up before publishing. But again, nothing abysmal. Let's just hope that this is the worst of it. On June 15th, 2 weeks after the trial of the 3 witches, a goat's head was left at the doorstep of a priest. Only a day later, a professor wandered into the woods and later returned with a strange artifact. He studied it and called it the Heart of Bwer, or alternatively, a Bwer heart. He gave it this name as blood colored a deep shade of purple coursed through its veins, and a timpani drum-like heartbeat emanated from the item. Bony fingers protruded from 2 opposite ends. Beady eyes were littered across its surface, and hair was starting to grow around them. Nearly everything about it was hellish, and it was named after an ancient demon from German folklore, Bwer, which is depicted as a lion's head attached to a set of 5 goat legs. He wrote to an out-of-town colleague about the object. Oh dear. So, for starters, we're once again back to the concept of unnecessarily providing shorthanded alternatives for an item when it's very easy to assume said shorthands. Never assume your readers are stupid. And even if you do, and you suspect that there might be confusion, always try to alleviate any possible confusion in a way that doesn't treat the audience like they're stupid. In my opinion, this does the latter. It kind of just assumes that the audience is dumb and can't assume things on their own. While I do appreciate the description of this strange object, it is sadly very much brought down by the mistaken repeating of the word "and" twice in a row. So that's not very good. And finally, this may not be a problem to most people, but to me, being the one who wrote this story, I very much recognize that the elaboration on what a Bwer is and specifying that it's an ancient demon from German folklore very much comes across as sort of just being a weeaboo, but for German folklore. Because, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning of this section of the video, that is what I was at the time. And part of that was because of the show Madoka Magica, where all the monsters in that show were named after aspects of German folklore. On one hand, it can be really cool to implement things from a hyperfixation of yours into a story, but on the other hand, if you do so in a way that's awkward, it really sticks out like a sore thumb and does not become seamless with the story itself. The next day, something truly bizarre occurred. The Bwer hearts were growing on the trees surrounding the town, all emitting the same beat of a drum in unison. Thankfully, it wasn't very loud, so the noise didn't really annoy anybody. Of course, some called it witchcraft, though the town thought they had rid their village of sin. If only they knew what was coming for them, they would have ran. The focus on these heartbeats not annoying anyone is very odd, considering the frankly horrifying occurrence that would cause any potential annoyance. What a strange thing to clarify. Also, while this isn't the worst foreshadowing, at least as I see it, it comes across as a beginner's attempt at it, which it very much was. On the 13th, people mysteriously started to go missing. Men, women, children, livestock, nobody was immune to the mass procession. Children began to tell their parents about a tall, thin man with a hunched back and many limbs who would survey the forest, stalking them. Some called it Holzfaller, or der Baumann, or der Grossmann. They would state that he had little to no facial features, in a way that a child from the 1800s would speak, of course. Many didn't have the luxury of a fine education in that time period. But one young boy claimed he got closer to the mysterious figure than some of the children. He described the creature as having a completely blank face, save for his mouth. Width was littered with sharp and jagged teeth that were randomly placed at different angles, as well as having 2 long goat horns, and an extravagant Victorian suit. The townspeople had a new name for this fiend, der Ziegenmann. Oh dear. So not only do we have more grammatical issues and typos, but we also have some strange writing choices, and I know exactly why. See, like I mentioned, I used to watch the series Bad Creepypasta, and when they covered the story Origin of Laughing Jack, they mentioned how a child from that story's time period wouldn't have the education to recognize certain things that are mentioned. And so, in a bout of invalid hubris, my younger self clarified that the children in Krahendorf wouldn't have eloquently explained any of this. I guess you could say that she, as the author, was speaking to the reader, and that you're not supposed to do that shit. God, I miss when they didn't victim blame people. Also, the 13th? Did we go back in time? Oh dear, this story's falling apart, isn't it? And I had such high hopes. On June 30th, the old village had a visitor. It was the colleague of the professor. The stranger was in the same profession as he was. Professor Diedrich Welldone was his name. Not much else happened. Welldone took one of the Werhards for studying and left. As simple as that. Rumor had he was studying monsters. Not like the boogeyman, Noctkrop, or Krampus, but real monsters. Eldritch horrors that plague the mortal realm. Of course, it's never a good idea to believe in rumors. However, most rumors form from some kind of truth, don't they? Rumor had, huh? And you were so cocky about this story, my younger self. For shame. For shame. Also, the average reader doesn't know what a Noctkrop is, even if they should, given it's a really cool monster. While I don't like how blatant the Lovecraft inspiration is, what I do like is, funnily enough, the author speaking directly to the reader with that little tidbit about rumors stemming from some loose truth. That's a nice bit of flair that stays within the realm of horror. Honestly, this kind of writing should have been used for more noir-inspired pulp horror setting. Holy shit, did I just give myself inspiration in the middle of dunking on myself? One day later, July 1st, the dissipation of Krahendorf would truly kick into action. First, it was the fog, or whatever you would call it. It was a mass of black clouds with limbs and tendrils reaching out. This taint surrounded the whole village, forming an arcane barrier. One person tried to escape, but one of the arms poking out formed its hand into a mouth and ate the man whole. Of course, people were terrified. Some even thought it was the work of Satan himself. If only they knew what was really at play. But perhaps they brought it on themselves. The next day, there was a loud heartbeat, one that everyone heard. All over the ground were strange little stems. Black beating hearts with mouths. They weren't the source of the heartbeat, though, but rather the barrier was. The day after that, the mouthed hearts would periodically scream, and when they did, it sounded outlandish to say the least. It sounded like an young girl and a fully grown man screaming in unison with some beastly howl, singing their agonizing tunes. And we were doing so well. So much of this is genuinely very imaginative and, at least in my opinion, pretty effective for a spooky story. And then we get to the typo. It sounded like an young girl. Dear God. After that, starting at 5 in the morning, the bells of a clock tower chimed every second. Children cried, adults screamed, and all the livestock were found dead. The strangest thing about the sounds, however, was that church bells shouldn't have been heard, as Krahendorf had no clock tower to speak of, not at the center of town nor at the church. This drove some people to throw themselves at the barrier, wanting to die so they wouldn't have to deal with this hell. However, they were the lucky ones. The next day, all the noises stopped. The people thought it was over, but in reality, it wasn't. The barrier had now formed eyes, mouths, and tongues. All was quiet, however. Some people knew it wasn't over. They just had a feeling it wasn't, and so they sacrificed themselves, taking their own lives to escape from this foul series of events. Yet again, some great horror prose ruined by bad grammar. This time it's a tense swap. Hooray! Maybe this story does have time travel. That, or it's just incompetence on my younger self's part. The sun didn't rise for an entire day. It was July 6th when the sun rose again. However, it wasn't the sun the folk were used to. The sky was filed with a bright purple, and what would have been the sun was instead a deep crimson red sphere. Say it with me, everyone. Some decent horror prose ruined by a typo. Also, this was oddly prophetic in a way, considering that I came up with this way before I had ever played Bloodborne. And, looking back, yeah, this visual still fucks. When the sun positioned directly above the town, the barrier vanished. Soon, the Ziegenmen rushed into the town, mauling anyone it could find. It was a massacre. The creature sloppily devoured many. When it was finished, only the professor remained. He had made it so far, but he didn't want to die. The professor's name was Arnfried Schmidt. The creature stood before Arnfried. He feared for his life. It stood motionless, hunching its back, allowing several spider-like legs to freely move around. Without making a single sound, it handed him a handkerchief. A black, lace-patterned handkerchief. After that, the creature walked off into the fog. The comma between after and that isn't the most egregious thing compared to everything else, but because of everything else, it is pretty bad. It throws off the mental flow for readers. The piece of flying cloth was folded, as if to cover something. He unfolded it, and saw a pocket watch attached to an amulet with a note. Written on it were only 3 words, for Diedrich Welldone. At least this story didn't end on a sour note that would ruin its quality. And for the most part, this story actually attempts at trying to convey horror. But again, because of those rookie mistakes, and in tandem, the arrogance from my past self while writing this that she could undoubtedly do so great, this story does fall apart. That being said, there is an author's note at the end. Let's read it. Alright, it's been a few months since I published this story, and I don't really think I did that good. Not necessarily horrible, but I feel as if when I was writing this, I wasn't truly in tune with my creative style. And so, I believe a rewrite is in order, and so, I'll work on that soon. Plus, I have new ideas on how to make that story better. So cheers! But sadly, that day never came. But it might soon. I can absolutely see what my younger self was trying to go for. Again, at the beginning of this segment, I already understood that I wanted to go for a more fusion between gothic and rustic horror, and I feel as if that would have been so great if this story had actual quality assurance put into it. And so, while not nearly as bad as the last one, it is very much not the best. However, again, compared to the last one, it is a massive improvement. And not just that, but also a very clear demonstration that I can do something pretty good if I actually put in the time to refine it and not just try to rush it out in 1 or 2 nights. And with that, we have gone over 2 old creepypastas of mine, both of which being written by different past versions of myself. I really hope you enjoyed this little waltz down my personal memory lane, and more so, I really hope that something I've said in this video has given you some genuine advice for writing a story. Part of the reason why I wanted to make this was because, well, 1, I needed something to post during the first few weeks of Spookathon, but more so because if any of you who watch my videos are aspiring creatives, I feel as if these lessons are kind of necessary. You know, in order to really grow in your creative style, you need to learn to let yourself fail so you can succeed later. Art is a process, and part of that process is stumbling so that you can stand proudly later on. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful night, and more so, I hope to see you later this month for the rest of Spookathon. Good night.